It is my pleasure to greet everyone, particularly our distinguished panelists, at the third webinar of the non-governmental organization Ukraine 2050 on the theme Ukraine's European integration, on course or off. My name is Eugene Choli, and I'm the past president of the Ukrainian World Congress, the current president of NGO Ukraine 2050, and the moderator of this webinar. Ukraine 2050 is a nonprofit NGO established in Ukraine in December 2019 to help implement within one generation, namely by 2050, strategies for the sustainable development of Ukraine as a fully independent, territorially integral, democratic, reformed, and economically competitive European state. The main objectives of Ukraine 2050 are to promote the full membership of Ukraine in NATO and the EU, the recognition of the patriarchal status for both the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, and the positioning of Ukraine in the top 10 EU states by gross domestic product and in the top 20 countries in the UN World Happiness Report. As you can see on your screens, the leadership of Ukraine 2050 is composed of very prominent personalities, as our honorary board includes the head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, and the rectors of three of the best universities in Ukraine, namely the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, the Lviv Polytechnic National University in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian Catholic University. Our board of directors also includes leading members of our churches, the Ukrainian World Congress and the World Congress of Ukrainian Youth Organizations, a Ukrainian member of the Romanian Parliament, the managing partner of one of the top law firms in Ukraine, Vasil Kisil and Partners, the president of the Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce, the director of the International Institute of Education, Culture, and Diaspora Relations at the Lviv Polytechnic, and the scientific director of the Molecular Pathology Laboratory at McGill University Health Center. The executive director of Ukraine 2050 is Miron Naida from Kyiv, who is helping me with this webinar. The technical director of our NGO is Andrew Mazepa from Montreal, and he is responsible for all technical issues regarding this webinar. I wish to take this opportunity to thank Caisse Populaire Desjardins Ukrainienne de Montréal, a Ukrainian credit union in Montreal, for its precious support of the activities of our NGO. On April 24, 2020, Ukraine 2050 sent an open letter to the presidents of the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the European Council, stating that in today's new reality, the EU leadership should promote Ukraine's accelerated accession to the EU for its own immediate and future self-interest. Indeed, the EU stands to gain a young, vibrant, educated, and ambitious population of 43 million in Ukraine, supported by a worldwide diaspora of over 20 million, which is willing to face and overcome the greatest of challenges in order to guarantee Ukraine's European future. Ukraine is also a land with tremendous natural and technological resources that would considerably strengthen and enrich the European Union, particularly after the negative impact of Brexit. In fact, if Brexit was arguably the EU's greatest failure, then Ukraine's full membership in the European Union will become the EU's greatest success story. Indeed, Ukraine's membership in the EU would vividly change the entire playing field in Europe in the best interests of all EU member states. Last Thursday, on July 23, 2020, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission, Joseph Borrell, met with Ukraine's Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal, in Brussels. Following that meeting, the EU issued a press release stating that the EU High Representative and Vice President of the European Commission commended the efforts of President Volodymyr Zelensky in the implementation of the Minsk agreements and reiterated the EU's commitment for full support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and reiterated the EU's expectation that Russia reciprocates Ukraine's efforts, fully implements the Minsk agreements, and uses its influence on the armed formation it backs. Unfortunately, this expectation was already severely undermined by the harsh reality that Russian forces violated the last ceasefire agreement on the very day that it took effect, namely on July 27, 2020. The EU High Representative also reaffirmed that the EU's sanctions against the Russian Federation remain in place, underlined the EU's readiness to continue to support Ukraine in the implementation of reforms, stressed the need for the Ukrainian authorities to sustain reform efforts on the judiciary, the prosecution, and the security sectors, raised the potential negative impact that the dismissals of reform-oriented officials within the Ukrainian government and the Prosecutor General, as well as the resignation of the governor of the National Bank of Ukraine, could have on the sustainability of the reform agenda, and welcomed the government's readiness to continue intense reform efforts in line with the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. We invited 4 outstanding panelists to share with us their assessment of the challenging process of Ukraine's European integration by asking them whether Ukraine's European integration is on course or off. Before we start, I would ask our Executive Director, Miron Naida, to explain some administrative issues pertaining to this webinar. Mr. Naida?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, distinguished members of the European Parliament, dear participants of our webinar. I wish to inform you about some regulations which will make our webinar more comfortable. Each panelist will have up to 15 minutes for the presentation. I will send a message to each panelist by private chat 3 minutes before the time is up for the presentation. Our participants can write their questions to the panelists in the questions and answers section. The questions can be directed to a specific panelist or the moderator. In the absence of such indication, the moderator will determine who will answer the question, or any panelist can take such initiative. The participants can determine the priority of the questions by pressing the like button next to a question. Such question will then move up on the list of the question. Our webinar is recorded, and a link to the recording will be posted on our NGO's website within 3 working days. Thank you. I wish everyone a very interesting webinar.
Thank you, Mr. Naida. Our first panelist is Anna Fotyga, a member of the European Parliament from Poland, the Foreign Affairs spokesperson for the European Conservatives and Reformists group at the European Parliament, the Vice President of the European Conservatives and Reformists Party, the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs in 2006 and 2007, and a member of the NATO Reflection Group. Mrs. Fotyga, I cede you the floor.
Thank you for inviting me to this excellent event. Thank you for possibility to participate in a panel with my outstanding European Parliament colleagues. Allow me to be slightly provocative. Actually, it looks a bit dull because all of us panelists, as I see them, are deeply engaged in supporting Ukraine. So most probably we are to be quite close in our remarks and our views. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19 pandemics, we were not able to visit Ukraine as frequently as we used to during 2020. Also, we were not able to commemorate the 5th anniversary of annexation of Crimea that we used to commemorate quite visibly in the European Parliament, reminding the world about conflict, war, aggression going on just at our doorsteps in the eastern neighborhood of the European Union. Ukraine, for more than 5 years already, has been engaged in a very ambitious reform program, having its meandering, of course, yet all of us, I think, we assess this process as extremely challenging for both parties, for the EU member states, and also for Ukraine, and in particular, Ukrainian society. And in the same time, the country was engaged in both negotiations with the aggressive party, Russian Federation, that was supporting the separatists that were so much visible and engaged in eastern part of Ukraine, and also in combating the aggression. Now we have, as you rightly say, the consecutive stage of negotiations, international community willing to push, including ourselves, with our personal engagement and outspoken support for finding peace for Ukraine. Although I must admit I was very skeptical about eventual outcome of the ceasefire that was set to start 27th of July. The same day it was to start effect. The ceasefire was broken by the separatist side, and therefore we see the constant goodwill of Ukraine, of Ukrainian government in solving this dire situation, and lack of goodwill on the other side. Unfortunately, we stress, we reiterate the illegal occupation of Crimea. Despite the flow of time, we reiterate that the integrity of Ukraine should be maintained, that Crimea is part of Ukrainian territory, and moreover, the eastern part of Ukraine should be under part of the country according to Minsk agreements. We push for fulfilling the Minsk agreement. We monitor the situation, internal situation in Ukraine, knowing difficulty in fulfilling very ambitious modernization and reform agenda. We push for implementation of the agenda according to the association agreement. Yes, you are also right that both sides require further enlargement. In particular, after Brexit, it is very visible that in Ukrainian society we find a very dedicated part of Europe dedicated to Euro-Atlantic integration. Here I would like to use my double hat status and say that also transatlantic integration is of enormous importance. Security issue is of enormous importance to whole Europe, and Ukraine closer and closer to NATO is of interest to both Ukrainian and transatlantic community. So we strongly support Ukraine's integration. As I say, I hope that what we sometimes see as weakened dedication of Ukraine to this agenda is just meandering of this process, simply showing difficulty of this situation, combining fighting for territorial integrity and ambitious reform agenda is always difficult. We in Poland know it perfectly well, yet both angles should be looked into, and be sure that we stand by you. Only yesterday we show enhancing to political level of the trilateral format of cooperation between Lithuania, Poland and Ukraine, adding to defense and security aspect by forming the trilateral Lithuanian, Polish, Ukrainian brigade bearing the name of the commander Hetman Konstanty Ostrowski. Very, I would say, very inspiring example of our common history, very positive and brave history, somebody who is buried in Kiev and having roots both in Lithuania and Poland as well. So I think that this track, bringing Ukraine closer by a variety of formats and ways, roots of cooperation is extremely important. All the best.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Fotyga. The second panelist is Andrius Kubilius, a member of the European Parliament from Lithuania, the Prime Minister of Lithuania in 1999 and 2000, and then from 2008 to 2012, a member of the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee, a member of the European Parliament delegation to the EU-Ukraine Parliamentary Association Committee, and a promoter of a Marshall Plan for Ukraine. Mr. Kubilius.
Mr. Chole, dear colleagues, really, it's pleasure to and honor to participate in such a very important webinar. And well, I remember very well our joint efforts, when you have been a president of World Ukrainian community, to promote Ukrainian integration issues in different formats. So really, you are doing a great job, and I think that exactly your new initiative, Ukraine 2050, that kind of think tank is really very important, because it brings exactly what is very much needed for Ukraine, some kind of long-term vision, long-term ambition. And I hope that there will be no need to wait till 2050, to achieve those very, very important goals. As well, after speaking after Madame Fotiga, it's really very difficult to find what to add, And of course, all of us who are on the panel, we are really big fans of Ukrainian integration. And if I would have a right to make a decision, Ukraine would have membership perspective since 2014, and now it should be candidate and so on and so on. So from that point of view, really we need to be, we don't need to convince ourselves. We need to speak very realistically, where are the issues, where are the challenges, where are the problems. And of course, there are problems, as always, in all the candidate countries, in all post-Soviet countries, there are problems inside of the countries. Reforms are needed to be done, some reforms were done. Really, we can be very happy what we have seen even with the recent, in recent Rada, for example, land reform and things like that. But of course, there are things which we would like to see improved, and no backsliding, especially in justice, things, no politicization of justice and things like that. But when we're talking about integration of Ukraine, at least in my opinion, there are, as I said, there are problems inside of Ukraine, but more problems are on our side, on EU side. And we need to be very, very open, transparent, and very realistic. Why, for example, EU is providing membership perspective for Western Balkans, which is very much important, very much needed, and the language which EU leaders are using in order to say why Western Balkans membership is needed is very correct. Exactly, Western Balkans are not integrated into EU, and either Russia or China or even Turkey can move in and destabilize the whole region. But that is even more important for Ukraine. For Ukraine, which is we see clearly attempts by Putin to destabilize Ukraine. But again, when we are talking about EU, why EU is still not speaking openly about membership perspective? We should not believe in all those arguments that EU is tired on enlargement, that EU is is not ready from administrative point of view. All those arguments are really not very truthful. Of course, there are problems with how to administrate much larger EU. There are, perhaps people are not always, very happy with enlargement when our citizens are coming into old Europe and so on and so on. But that is not a real reason why EU is not making clear geopolitical decision on membership perspective. We need to be very clear, and I see really that when we are talking about issue of Ukraine integration, we need to speak about three factors. It's Ukraine, how much Ukraine is ready. It's EU, how much EU is ready, to make geopolitical decisions. But also there is Russia, and Russia is making impact, very, very heavy impact, not direct impact, but impact on EU readiness to to move forward, with integration of Ukraine. This, hidden understanding that integration of Ukraine will provoke Putin for more of aggression, that is, this is what exists in big capitals of EU. And that is why we need to be really, we need to understand this issue. And we need to find a way how to convince big capitals that, exactly opposite view should be prevalent inside of big EU capitals. Integration of Ukraine into EU is the only one instrument which can help positive transformation of Russia in the longer term. Not maybe with Putin, but maybe after Putin, but that is the only way. So success of Ukraine is exactly what Putin is very much afraid of. And that is why he's trying to intervene. He's continuing with his occupation of Crimea, with all his military activities in Donbass, not to allow Ukraine to become a successful country. Because example of success of Ukraine can have the major soft power influence on developments inside of Russia. And that is what we need to talk in big capitals, trying to convince that, look, really, if we want to resolve biggest issues on European continent, and that is, what I call tectonic conflict with autocratic Russia, or conflict of Russia with all remaining, European continent, then the only way how we can move forward is really to be brave enough, geopolitically brave enough, and to push forward integration of Ukraine into EU, because that is the only way how Ukrainian success can be created. There is no other example in post-Soviet, no single example in post-Soviet, the whole post-Soviet region, that any country without integration into EU was able to create its own success. So that's my point of view. And here I see really some kind of, possibilities that, despite the fact that sometimes EU is quite reluctant with its more brave and more ambitious geopolitical decisions, but it can happen that developments in Russia itself, and first of all in Belarus, what we are watching now, can make a difference. And I think that exactly Ukrainian example, for example, towards Belarus is making quite a heavy impact. And that is why EU needs to be ready. That things in that region can change very rapidly. And when we see, very, very parallel developments in Belarus, with really civil society showing clear evidence that majority of the people, more than 50%, are going for change. When we see developments in Far East, in Khabarovsk, very similar, when Russian people are going into the streets and demanding resignation of Putin, so that opens some kind of totally new perspectives, where I think exactly EU should be more brave to move forward with more clear geopolitical strategy, first of all towards Ukraine, and also to other Eastern Partnership countries, especially those who have association agreements like Georgia and Moldova. But Belarus is catching up. Now, very briefly, what besides, let's say, those developments which are happening in Belarus or Russia, what we need to do on our side? I think that we need to, having in mind really that obstacle to Ukrainian integration on EU side is first of all this elephant in the room, Russia. We need to have much more clear EU strategy towards Russia, where exactly Ukrainian success could be one of the most important instruments. And second, we need to have much more clear strategy how we shall push forward Ukrainian agenda inside of EU. Ukrainian or all three, most advanced countries, what we call, trio strategy. And here I see possibilities really to push forward as much as possible EU instruments, which EU is using for Western Balkans integration. And first of all, economical, investment, interconnectivity instruments, to start to be used in also towards Ukraine as much as possible. And that is why I think that we can be really very practical also. On one side, we can raise ambitious, geopolitical questions. Why Ukraine still does not have membership perspective. We can raise questions about EU strategy towards Russia, but also we need to have very practical instruments, much more of them than now are used for Ukraine, and that would be also beneficial. And again, Anna Fotiga mentioned exactly what I was prepared to say at the end. I think that this is very important step forward, which had happened yesterday with this what was called Lublin trio. I don't know how it will be called. When foreign affairs ministers of Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine agreed on some kind of much stronger cooperation in foreign affairs and on geopolitical agenda, because exactly I think that Poland and Lithuania should be some kind of leaders in pushing forward Ukrainian agenda inside of EU, and especially that here will be some very important occasions during the next decade. Poland will be in EU presidency in 2025. Lithuania will be in 2027. And here will be also some other countries before us, like Sweden in 2023, Czech Republic, if I'm correct, in 2022, Latvia in 2028. And if Poland and Lithuania will take, together with Ukraine, some kind of role of leadership, trying to build a coalition of the friends of Ukrainian integration inside of EU, I think that we can achieve quite a lot. And I see quite a realistic that really, Ukraine during the next decade, during our presidencies, really will be able to achieve candidate status for integration into EU. But besides that, of course, it's very important. And here again, I am finishing with my really enthusiasm about Ukraine 2050. I think that what Mr. Chole, your think tank can do exactly, to push together with the government, perhaps what I call Ukrainian national integration strategy, which should be not only about what kind of reforms Ukraine needs to do, that is definitely is very much needed, but how to make much more intensive. Together with all the friends, together with Lithuania and Poland, much more intensive international lobbying, both inside of EU, but also in United States, in Canada. You have very good possibilities, and looking forward to, how things can develop with the United States of America. I see quite an interesting also opening that United States of America, when they're speaking about China, they started to speak much more about democracy. And if democracy really is becoming again one of the top priorities for United States of America, then democracy in Russia also can become a topic for United States of America. And then Ukraine can play, again, I am finishing with that, very important, success of Ukraine can play very important role in that global agenda. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Kubilius, for an excellent presentation and for giving us ready advice as to how to continue our work for the NGO Ukraine 2050. The third panelist is Michael Galler, a member of the European Parliament from Germany, the standing rapporteur on Ukraine at the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee, the vice chair of European Movement Germany, and a member of the European People's Party Executive and Political Assembly. Mr. Galler.
Yes, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, Szanowni Druzy, Eugene, thanks for taking the initiative. And as you see, the usual suspects are around from the European Parliament. There are no holidays when it comes to Ukraine. We interrupt it for this purpose, and I think that is good to have it this way. And perhaps that is one of the advantages of the having to cope with this COVID crisis. Actually, I think we have had more meetings, although not physically, but more meetings in different setups with regard to Ukraine than we would under normal circumstances have had. So insofar, we can bridge in the real sense the gap of not being able to travel by having easygoing contacts and getting people together at short notice, and thanks for that. Indeed, I think as we are amongst like-minded colleagues in the European Parliament, those who formulate the policies on Ukraine, and indeed me included, like the previous speakers, I think we really see this European not only perspective, but this integration process for Ukraine as the finalité, that we would like to see it at the end and not only discuss about it. But indeed, also at the same time, we see that in general, this enlargement process, although it has served its purpose, I would say, roughly speaking, I would say that the enlargement process has served us good, all the new ones, the old ones, the big ones and small ones overall. But we see this fatigue that is around. We have witnessed, even for a small country like Northern Macedonia, what hiccups it took to live up to our own promises that we did towards this very small country in the Western Balkans. And with regard to a country like Albania, with the own trouble that they are putting themselves into, well, we'll see how now the recent things will develop. What I want to say is, with regard to Ukraine, I think the best way to conduct a positive and ambitious discussion inside the European Union with regard to the integration perspectives of Ukraine, the best way is that Ukraine pursues this ambitious and continues to pursue this ambitious reform agenda. Ukraine wants to become a member. Ukraine needs to make itself attractive for us, that we at some point cannot say, hey, we cannot resist because it's so attractive, it's in our interest to have this huge country in our ranks because it makes us stronger. Now, we are not there, not yet, by no means. And still, there was one of the questions in the chat directly to me, especially whether in Germany people are still committed. I would say all those who deal with Ukraine remain committed, or those who are in the political sphere, who are the decision makers. We will not let this country down. We will continue also to keep up the pressure on Russia and to continue the sanctions. In this regard, that is, we are very clear in Germany. But the same applies with regard to Germany as to Europe as a whole. The more that Ukraine delivers on its own and our agreed agenda of reform, the better we can discuss and argue in favor of Ukraine. And insofar, we are at the moment, I would say, we are not totally happy about the pace and the speed of reform and the consequence with which it is pursued. We see in different areas that, shall I say, the old forces are trying to hit back, the old structures who would like to behave as in the old days. We see, I would say, in different areas challenges with regard to the continuation of the reform process. I was not happy when the General Prosecutor Rybachapka was ousted, had to leave. I think he had a consequent agenda. I was not happy to see a law being passed with regard to NABU. I mean, the purpose was to have this National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and its activities independent of daily policy making, but to secure this independence in their activities. I was not happy when the head of the National Health Service resigned. because I think it's essential, especially in this COVID crisis and these challenges that goes in all of our countries, that people, with regard to their own health, which is the most sensitive issue that can get people out of trust towards the authorities, if such a process where the reforms are on a good track, if that is put at risk or in question, I mean, the money must follow the patient. That is the principle, how it works. And there are interested circles who would like to change that and reinstate structures or mechanisms that open the gate for more corruption and diversion of the money flows in this very important sector. I mean, the banking law that was passed, that is welcome, of course. So what others call the anti-Kolomoisky law, it's good that that has been passed, but it needs in each regard to be implemented. And so these are some of the points. I mean, I'm also not happy about these attempts to set up this prefect system at some point, some months ago, when we saw that the aspects when it comes to decentralization and amalgamation, this process is as such is a good one. To get the responsibilities further down and also the money flows in this regard, and then to show who is better and who is worse in delivering on concrete issues for the people on the ground in the municipalities, and such hiccups like with this prefect system. It's yet another, would have been, and if there are those who might pursue it still, it is something which gets the responsibilities or a competition, an unhealthy competition of who does what and who has which funds available. That is nothing that the country needs, but it needs constant implementation of agreed reforms. So there are those issues which are problematic, and I'm also a bit afraid that there is a bit increasing pressure on the Verkhovna Rada in assuming their role. I mean, we've seen this first phase after the election, what we call this turbo legislation, which had its positive aspects. That's things that had for a while been hanging somewhere in the structures that could be done, yes. On the other side, turbo also means no real role of a parliament to assess in detail what is ongoing. And with all these new colleagues who are in their best intentions, also in Sluga Naroda, in the ruling party now, I've met many of them, and we all have met them, who have their best intentions, but they are met by those who have their hidden agenda, who are collaborating with other structures, and who are not so happy when the parliament starts actually assuming its role and responsibilities. And I would not like to see that Speaker Razumkov should be replaced after the summer break, like we have seen the former Prime Minister replaced. I think this current Speaker is willing and wanting to secure the role of the Verkhovna Rada, and rightly so. And insofar, we should also be very clear from our side that we encourage those who are the real reformers to continue their path and not allow the reform process to be stalled or hindered. I mean, we have another problem, frankly speaking. I think that the president is somehow isolated and kept from access to all information in his own presidential administration. I think the guys who are around him, they have a way of selectively informing him, and I put it bluntly, and perhaps even misleading him, and not allowing him to assess the full scale of the consequences of decisions that come from the presidential administration. I think in this regard, we should encourage all real reformers in Ukraine to join forces and to see to it that in transparent ways of policy making that come from the presidential administration, including the head of the presidential administration, that they are not pursuing a course that is not compatible and not, so to say, wanted by the majority in the parliament and certainly the people. I think the people are still on a wanting that the reform process is successful, because they still see that there are too many of the old structures making too much money, even in crisis times, and therefore there is a real need to pursue this ambitious agenda that has been agreed. And there is no need to talk about amending our association agreement, and certainly not a need for people arguing, we should not perhaps pursue this approach and getting our economy, so to say, compatible with EU legislation. No, it is the best way, whether the country has a formal candidate status or not, but the way to reform and come closer to us with legislation and with practice, that is the best way for the country, and not a way that would serve old oligarchic interests, arguing, we cannot follow this path, it's so heavy. No, that is what not only we and the real reformers, but the people expect, that the reforms are done for the purpose that all those old habits that are still around cannot be pursued. I mean, that is the point. Unfortunately, we are not yet offering a real accession perspective, because that is, I think, in the countries that are now members of the European Union, the former communist countries, from the very moment that it was clear that that they are on the way to the EU, those who could in the transitional phase manage to grab whatever they wanted to grab and become powerful, then at some point when it was clear there is a EU perspective, they embraced the rule of law, and they embraced, so to say, that what they have is their property and that they can be sure that it will be so. That's not yet the case, unfortunately, in Ukraine. That is why there are still too many who think with the old habits they can make their businesses, but that should, and therefore they argue, let's not be so ambitious with the implementation of this agenda that we have in the economic field. No, these are very obvious points why they do not want to follow this agenda, because it provides more legal security, more transparency, more accountability, and more control from those who are responsible for upholding the rule of law. And so far, such discussion is, I'm very much convinced, going in the wrong direction, and we should oppose it. So that's perhaps from my side what I would like to say at the beginning. Thank you.
Michael, thank you very much. I think that I recall our meetings in your office in Brussels, where these discussions were always full of concrete ideas. Your frank assessment of the situation and critical stance on various issues is certainly very helpful for Ukrainian reformists who wish to get that type of support from the EU in order to continue with much needed reforms in Ukraine. So thank you very much for your frank and clear assessment of the situation. The fourth panelist is Petras Auštrevičius, a member of the European Parliament from Lithuania, a member of the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee, the European Parliament Rapporteur on Eastern Partnership, and the chair of the European Parliament Informal Group of Friends of Europe and Ukraine. Petras, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you for organizing this exchange, and thank you to my colleagues who've been able and found a good time, to join this exchange. You know, Eugene, I do appreciate, all work you did once being in charge of World Ukrainian Council, or lobbying and representing diasporas worldwide. You did a good job. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to use your experience, your goodwill, and engagement in transferring this experience, and again, engaging into the Ukrainian domestic and international politics in order to push forward Ukraine's cause. You know, this is very first time for me, once I hear from the Ukrainian by origin man thinking in decades. Ukraine 2050 looked to me as a big challenge, because every time I am dealing with Ukrainians, Christmas time comes too soon and too quickly. I mean, 1 year is nothing. There are, I mean, dynamic of politics and economic life in Ukraine is very high, by the way. We have to acknowledge this. It's not like in a well-settled Western European countries, I mean, where reforms are by great extent accomplished and life goes more in a kind of foreseeable way. Ukraine in a different case, and that's why I appreciate, I mean, an attempt to think in decades to come. Why? Because I think we are more realistic, we are more frank, and probably we have time to plan events and to pre-plan some happenings what we will have to accomplish in order to bring Ukraine to European Union, because by history and culture, Ukraine belongs to Europe. Constitutionally, Ukrainians have each and every right, I mean, to belong to the European Union as well to the transatlantic community. But I mean, to do it, to accomplish this work legally and in a good administrative way, it takes time. Look, again, once thinking about 2050, 3 decades, well, let's agree, lots of time, lots of possibilities. Later on, I will come probably with my plan for all 3 decades, naming each and every according to my understanding what can be accomplished and achieved. But again, here we are. I mean, all colleagues of mine are really usual suspects. I mean, they speak for the cause of Ukraine strongly and vividly every time in the European Parliament and international forums. But let's be frank, we represent just a part of the bench. Another part of the bench sometimes and quite often have more pessimistic and more relaxed points of view on EU enlargement. By the way, the European Union's enlargement policy is foreseen by 2025. Nothing here decided after 2025 and more decades to come. But there are people who have sometimes, I would say, not very favorable, and let's be open, sometimes even negative points of view on Ukraine. And we have to do everything possible to stop and to limit the damage what other side might do towards enlargement and Ukraine in particular. Again, we have a very special case more to east. Look, Mr. Putin was given an extension by 2034. I mean, by maximum of lack of time. So we have to take this into consideration, since we will have a very strong opposition, if not more, from the Russian side. So we have to be ready at least for 15 years, which legally speaking and by constitution is given an extension to Mr. Putin, who has own understanding about Ukraine and Ukrainian nation, which I completely disagree, but nevertheless. Look, situation in Ukraine is indeed dynamic and changes every day. But I will make probably 4 points from my side. First of all, we need a very strong and lasting commitment from the European Union. I would call it, for this decade, maybe Association Plus. We need indeed a motivation from the European politicians to see Ukraine as a potential state of the Union, a fully fledged member of the European Union. And here, I have to admit, political lobby and support from member states is essential. So what you did once visiting many times Brussels and EU institutions, it has to be repeated every time. We have to be present with the Ukrainian message, with our set of information, and I would say good information, good news for European institutions about things which are changing in Ukraine for better. But European commitment, and I am speaking about the EU enlargement policy after 2025, is an essential part of this strategy. Secondly, we do need continuously successful pace of comprehensive reforms in Ukraine. I know it's painful, and I would call it still a very beginning of this process. Sometimes we forget the timeline. Look, Ukraine has association agreements only for 5 years, only for 5 years. And within this period of 5 years, we already see lots of very positive, no return changes in Ukraine and in our attitude towards Ukraine because of those changes. We have to support economic reforms in Ukraine. This is to produce a competitive, modern economy for a country and to raise up level of well-being of people, which is very down because of an aggression, military aggression, as well as fall down of economy because of many reasons and so on. It's a part. And politically, judicial and administrative reforms in Ukraine, it's about the resilience of Ukrainian state to withstand any challenges, domestic or outside challenges which might affect Ukraine in between. So if we look into the reforms achievements in Ukraine, I think we have very many and good arguments to support that Ukraine performs. Thirdly, we need mobilization of political support within Ukraine for reforms, for those politicians and political forces which stand behind, I would say, a new Ukraine. It's not given. Populism is not an invention in Ukraine. Rather, it's more invention in US or in Western Europe. I mean, we see many bad examples of this, but to sustain a hope that this generation, you rightly said, we're speaking about next generation, but this generation should be given really an argument that with the new relationship with the EU, with the transformation within, Ukraine might be raising up to the levels of, I would say, average European state. It's far away from now, I agree, but it's not something what we shouldn't speak about. Mobilization is important. And fourthly, I think we have to overcome dire humanitarian situation, which is again very much because of the Eastern aggression. Millions of internally displaced persons. According to the latest statistics, 1.5 million of elderly people who live in that region, because the younger generation probably left that region and is looking forward for the better life somewhere else in Ukraine or in Europe. But disabled people, elderly people who stayed, they should be supported. I mean, it's something what should be not forgotten, because look at this Corona situation in Europe, how much Italian and Spanish cases were highlighted because of the suffering and a very dire situation, and become a kind of motivation for the new policy approach, even to budgeting and economic recovery funds. In this regard, the humanitarian situation should be taken by us as a serious challenge for Ukraine as well as for Europe. And finally, indeed, anti-corruption fight and new judicial system is coming up and fighting with the strong opposition, first of all, within Ukraine. I will never support any attempts, to weaken NABU mandate. In opposite, we have to do everything to highlight good job done by them and to support them financially by administrative and politically, those people who are standing in a front line fighting corruption. Recently, again, news stories about Kiev District Administrative Court. If those issues are not resolved, if the judicial system remains built according to the old fashion, it will be no trust, will be so many cases of disillusioned people and not working properly judicial system in general. And finally, about 3 decades, what you, Evgen, promised for a new generation to give a new hope, a new country for people to come. Look, I see this decade as a decade for differentiated integration. What I mean by this, in our report for Eastern Partnership, we made it clear. Now Ukraine should be given a bit more. And by the way, on case of Ukraine, European Union might and probably should test new instruments, new programs, and new approaches, since Ukraine is a decisive piece of Eastern Partnership policy line. So differentiated integration is meant under the meaning of integration to the different sectors. Once you are ready and able and willing, and there is a positive response from the European Union. I'm speaking about the joint economic space. First of all, joint economic space. Economy is of primary importance for Ukrainians and Ukraine in general. Second generation and decade, starting from 2030, we might speak about negotiations. Negotiations and accelerated political and integration at large. And third decade is already final stages of integration and membership. Membership through the transitional periods, it will be unavoidable, so on. By this, I see a good plan for many people who really want to see Ukraine to be part of this process, because 3 decades to come will be busy. Let's be frank. That's why, by the way, Evgen, we made a proposal to establish Eastern Partnership University in Ukraine. I don't know, will it be Kiev, Lviv, or Odessa? Because we need a new generation of administrators, managers, all right? Lawyers and young people, motivated people who want to build this country according to the European perspective. But I do agree with my colleagues. Our positive response and extended hand of cooperation, first of all, under the principle of Europeization and open gates for Ukraine and other Eastern Partnership countries as they are ready, must be a very first principle to which we have to abide. Thank you, Eugen.
Thank you, Petrus. I think that we have seen that although it is July 29, smack in the middle of summer, we have, as they have themselves described, themselves as being the usual suspects, the members of the European Parliament that really do want to push Ukraine's European integration are critical where that needs to be said, and are superbly supportive in order to promote, and as Petros has said, convince that other side of the European Parliament that might be less interested in Ukraine's European integration. I thank you all for these very interesting presentations. I think that we'll start with the first question, Miran, that has picked up most support or most likes, and is a very important document, the association agreement, the need to amend it or not. I think that Michael has already answered, at least started an answer along regarding the need or not to amend. Does any other panelist, and Michael, I'm not excluding you, of course, want to comment on the need or not to amend the association agreement?
If we look at the association agreement and a deep free trade agreement we have next to it, because it's an essential part as well of our dealing with Ukraine. On economic side, I think inevitably we will come with different figures and more, let's say, relaxation of EU market, internal market towards Ukrainian economy. But I would be in favor of taking this differentiated integration approach towards different sectors. Take it telecommunications, labor market. I mean, we're speaking about 4 freedoms. Why not? Why not to open up gradually once Ukrainian side ready and EU side is convinced that we are on real grounds, on EU law grounds, nothing inventing special for this. Why not going for 4 freedoms? I think that would be very essential for Ukraine to be a part of a single market, not probably of the political establishment yet. I mean, in a decision-making sense of this, but economically, I think we have to come to the one point when amendments will be inevitable. Association agreement as such is not yet fulfilled. It will take some years, if not a decade, for full fulfillment, but on economic side, I would be ready very much.
Thank you. Does any other panelist wish to comment on the need or not to look at amendments to the association agreement?
I will add just a few words, you know. Petros is correct. And I would urge really to look into the results, what association agreement allows to achieve, and not so much into the process, you know, how to amend the association agreement. Sometimes, especially we politicians or bureaucrats, are very keen, you know, to start some kind of, you know, new amendments, new, you know, processes of negotiations, and then, you know, it takes a lot of activity, a lot of resources, intellectual resources. But what is important for Ukraine and what is important for EU is really a final result. So let's concentrate more on implementation of what is, you know, agreed in association agreement than, you know, in some kind of, you know, inventions what should be amended. If things really will show that there is a need of amendment, then it will be done. But before that, I would say, you know, let's concentrate on implementation.
Thank you. Anyone else on?
Yeah, may I?
Please.
Thank you. Actually, I would like to echo Mr. Kubilius' view on amending the association agreement and accompanying deep and comprehensive trade agreement. I think that in many areas, actually, as I say, Ukraine makes enormous effort to keep the society dedicated to the process of reform, I think it is also important to exert certain marketing, and marketing, political marketing in this case, means that we have kind of obligation on our side also that Ukraine is welcome as associated country. We should be very cautious in piling requirements. It is extremely, I know how difficult it is to implement the reform process and keep the political pace within the country. So we have to take this as well into account. And I rather support keeping it stable, focusing on implementation stage. Whenever necessity arises, for example, after COVID-19, or in case to differentiate microeconomic support, that is also the opportunity for amending things, but we should be very cautious. In my opinion, I remember still requirements on our side for visa liberalization, and how bitter it was to listen to Ukrainians' comments on so many requirements, and actually renewed requirements as well. So I'm very cautious.
Yes, perhaps to add from my side, I think it always depends on the concrete issues that are requested. I think it should, in case that we see that they are advancing quicker than foreseen, we should of course be very forthcoming in this regard. When the reforms are getting quicker done, and in return we promise something from our side, then fine. But if it is obviously only for the sake of preserving existing unhealthy structures in the economic sector, certain monopolies, I mean, I heard just at the beginning of the week of ongoing activities of Mr. Firtash, who sits comfortably in Vienna and still exercises his very negative influence inside Ukraine. We should not give a helping hand for such possibilities to be facilitated. To the contrary. So I would say, for instance, we have seen positive developments. I mean, if we look at some sectors in the agriculture exports of Ukraine into the European Union, they have been very successful. At the same time, I know how sensitive that is in agriculture in many of our member states, who would like to avoid additional competition. But I think it must be a give and take. When Ukraine opens its markets for certain products, we must and should do it on our side. But for instance, when it's about the tariffs, the customs rates that are still there, I would perhaps be happy to make a link between a real reform of the customs authorities and implementation of that, and thereby ending the corruption that is prevalent there, and in return then lower the customs fees. I mean, when we have lower rates, there is of course less corruption possible. Yeah, if there is nothing to be avoided because the rates are either zero or very low, then it's not very attractive to have corrupted structures there. But if that goes together, for instance, with a real reform of the customs authority, then we might have a win-win situation. At the end, the customs authority work without corruption, and we have almost no tariffs anymore in many relevant areas. So perhaps give and take and a linkage and conditioning of concrete issues, that would be the way forward. But as I said, not for the sake of allowing corrupt structures to continue or prolong their activities.
Thank you very much, Miran. Would you be kind enough to say what is the next question that had the most likes?
We have a question to the specific panelist, to Mr. Geller. The question is there still active support among the German public for the development of Ukraine, or is the German public already tired by Ukraine's slow development, limitations of reforms, and lack of justice? Thank you.
Well, I think I at least tried to answer that already in my introductory remarks, saying, yes, of course, those who are of relevance, those who are interested, have keep their commitment to what we have agreed with Ukraine and want to pursue this process of reform, and at the same time also be very clear towards Russia. We will not, from the German side, allow the ending of sanctions unless Russia lives up to its commitments, be it with regard to Crimea. There is a separate part of sanctions, and with regard to Eastern Ukraine. I think we will not allow that they get away with it unharmed. That there is continued support, I think. I'm very convinced in this regard. And regardless, I think, who is in government, I'm very much, I would even say, if after the next elections we had a black-green government, the Greens are in Germany, and we know some of our colleagues in the European Parliament are very blunt and tough on criticizing Russia. So I could even imagine if we had in a bit more than a year a new government without the Social Democrats, but with the Greens in the coalition, our stance towards Russia might or should become a bit more tougher. But that is my wish. Currently, we are by no means, we don't know how the next German government will look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
I see Miran, I see a question from Ms. Marlene Wall, the president of the LCC International University in Lithuania. One of our panelists talked about education, and Ms. Wall puts the following question that she directs to any member of the panel that wishes to answer. What is the role of higher education in building relations on both sides of this question? We currently have hundreds of wonderful Ukrainian students at our university in Lithuania, the LCC International University. We also partner with Ukrainian Catholic University. How can we help to empower these students as the future change agents for this integration project? Any of our panelists wants to take that on first?
I will try. Yeah,
Thank you.
I know LCC really is doing a great job, and since yes, you know, being present in Lithuania, they're doing a great job not only for Lithuania but really for quite many countries, including neighboring countries, including Ukraine. And that is very important. You know, Petros was speaking about European University in Kiev. That would be also very important. We can look into how to expand the activities of LCC, how to expand, for example, we have European Humanities University, which was established originally in Belarus, but ran away from Lukashenko regime into Vilnius. Because education of young generation really is very crucial for such countries like Ukraine or Belarus. And education in European, in liberal, you know, values, in Western values, is what is very helpful to build open and active, proactive, pro-European societies in those countries. We see it from experience of, for example, of EHU, where quite many of graduates are now very active in Belarusian developments. We see in Ukraine also that a lot of those who graduated, you know, in some Western universities are coming back and becoming really very prominent promoters of all the needed reforms. So there is nothing to add. I would urge again EU to spend more of their funds, in different, for different higher education institutions, which are really able to provide good Western type, European type education for young people from Eastern Partnership countries.
Eugen, may I?
Yes, of course.
Well, from my experience, I can tell you my opinion about Ukrainian students and young people is very positive. I mean, they're very competitive, they're very catchy, and they're very motivated. I can tell you one of my former stagiaires I just had in 2019, second part of 2019, she became a part of Naftogaz new administration. She was motivated and she was really good. And once in the meeting, she got acquainted with Naftogaz, and somehow, I mean, she got involved. It's a good example. What we have to do, we have to increase the Erasmus program in European Union. I really deplore so much the cuts made in multi-annual budget of European Union, and Erasmus program was one of the victims of those cuts. We have to increase financing of students from Eastern Partnership countries, from EU neighborhood and more far away located countries, in order to bring better educated, better equipped with the European Union and Europe in general system people back to the country. I can tell you that, to my mind, brain drain will remain a big problem for Ukraine in years, maybe in decades to come. It's a big issue. Now, some Ukrainians started to talk about this, but next to the European Union programs, I would encourage our national governments, I mean, to do a bit more, to open up some quotas in our universities and to offer some stipendiums to students from Ukraine, from different regions, to learn languages, I mean, to learn some technical and other professions in European Union countries, and to bring those people back to Ukraine to make a new potential for reforms in Ukraine.
Anyone else on this issue?
May I?
Yes, Ms. Spediga, just before you answer, I'll throw just one more question that's related in terms of education from Peter Stick, a member of our board of directors, who says that in light of the Russian Federation's policies and laws promoting revisionist history, do you think it would be benefit the EU-Ukraine integration if a common scholastic curriculum, particularly regarding the 20th century and the 21st century history, would be developed between the EU and Ukraine? You may wish to add that in your answer if possible. If not, then I'll throw that to any other panelists. Mrs. Spediga.
Okay, with regard to empowering young Ukrainians actually in pursuing reforms in Ukraine and building future fully integrated state integrated with Western institutions and organizations. I appeal to take into account also the Crimean Tatar community, other minorities that were living in Crimea, but in particular Crimean Tatars. I think that because of their history, they are extremely appealing to all those who still are reluctant in acknowledging the right of Ukraine territories of Crimea. I think they are excellent ambassadors. I used, and many of my colleagues in the European Parliament, to take interns from Crimea, and I think it was really very fruitful in terms of public diplomacy. They are very, very willing to support the cause of Ukrainian territorial integrity. And secondly, to speak about curriculum in your former capacity. You may remember we were raising also this issue. It is probably quite difficult to raise, but of course, I think that with acknowledged primary issue that is security, common security, and knowledge of challenges and threats to this common security, I think that it is necessary to overcome historic divisions, if you wish, or still historic tensions. It is to be given time. Of course, it should be raised always in truth, starting with historians. I think that we were able to overcome many issues, and here I think that Polish-Lithuanian, and in particular, Petra's and mine experience is very fruitful. We organized some time ago an excellent event, and I think that it was really very fruitful and a step forward in overcoming at least some difficulties. So I strongly believe in dialogue on this.
Thank you. In view of the fact that we're moving on with time, I see two questions that could be combined. One is high up from Volodymyr Kistyanik, who is a very close supporter of our NGO, who says that in Ukraine there are various institutions dealing with the issue of Ukraine's EU integration. But at the same time, we have a problem with perception of EU values by ordinary people. Could you identify ways how to enhance interaction between EU and ordinary Ukrainians? And that I would combine with a question from a member of our board, Andriy Stelmashchuk, who says, as you can see, our board asks tough questions. Has Ukraine already reached the point of no return on its way to EU? If not, what else should be done to ensure that there is no chance for a step back? What we Ukrainians, apart from our government, could do more?
If I make a start, I think what is important and remains important, that those who are responsible for pursuing the reform process, that they remain committed, and that the civil society and the real reformers, I always speak of the real reformers in politics, that they remain really vigilant and address the deficits or even the attempts to create obstacles to the implementation, to the real implementation of the reform agenda. I think Ukraine is not yet in a position where we can say it's the point of no return has reached. It is good to have the objective of EU and NATO membership inscribed in the constitution, so that cannot be easily removed. But that is, so to say, this political aspect for the principles. But when it comes to the reality on the ground, I think it is very necessary that all those who are engaging in different sectors of society, and not everybody can deal with each and every issue of reform, but everyone in his or her capacity or in where he or she are active in society should pursue this course and not let anybody who is in charge in the government off the hook, so to say, to look away when they see that something is going in the wrong direction. That is, and I hope in this regard, and that is perhaps the difference to Russia, the real difference to Russia. In Ukraine, there is a strong civil society. There is a huge diversity of opinions that are expressed. And insofar, I'm relatively hopeful that when both those in civil society keep the pressure, but also us, that we continue insisting on the course of reform, that it is very, very hard for those who would like to return to the old way, that they would be successful. So that's what I can say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I will try very briefly.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, it's obviously for Ukrainians it's quite difficult to keep motivation for reforms and for integration when EU is not providing membership perspective. That is, you know, obvious challenge, and especially for Ukraine, which is a big country, rich country, there is always, you know, temptation to try to go so-called third way, not to go with Moscow, because Moscow is you know, started the war against Ukraine. But if there is no you know perspective of membership coming soon, then of course temptation is to go for third way, which would be a very big mistake. I mean, that is, I think it's a dream of oligarchs, you know, to try to continue, you know, going with some kind of Ukrainian rules, not European rules, but Ukrainian rules. What can be done? You know, we were discussing, you know, how we can convince you. We shall do our job, but I would say really, what would be my advice for Ukrainians? Really to what Michael Galler said, you know, to have some kind of your own ambition. It's not so easy, of course, to have such an ambition, but I would suggest, for example, to measure yourself and to compare yourself with other, you know, Western Balkan countries, or for example with Georgia, you know, and Georgia is giving us very good argument to speak in some reluctant capitals of EU, because according to some evaluation done by Michael Emerson from SEPS, from Brussels think tank, when he compared according to all the different criteria available, you know, which country from Eastern Partnership and Western Balkan countries is most ready for integration, his answer was that Georgia is number one, even if to compare with all the Western Balkan countries. So that is what gives us an argument to speak in Brussels and in other capitals, you know, why you know Georgia should not be included as soon as possible into the list of the countries which are going through integration. Ukraine in that evaluation was not among the best prepared countries. So that would be my advice, you know, at least for Ukraine to have an ambition to become better than Georgia. I remember very well our experience, and Petras perhaps can repeat the same, how jealous we were to Estonians when EU always was, during our negotiations, when EU always was announcing that Estonia is number one among Baltic states and we are somewhere lagging behind. It was creating really a very strong emotion, you know, among Lithuanian public with a lot of criticism to our governments, you know, why we are lagging behind. And that is how really maybe it could help Ukraine also to have some kind of really clearly measurements, clear evaluation, you know, and clear goal really to become the best prepared country for integration.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Eugen,
Yes.
may I?
Yes, of course.
Very shortly. I think the best way, I mean, to learn about values or to transfer so-called European traditional values to Ukraine and to become based on common ground is not to teach a lesson, but to be open and to let Ukraine, I mean, to enjoy those freedoms and values itself. Best example what EU did was visa-free regime to Ukrainians. Nothing happened for worse. In opposite, we saw that Ukrainians behaved well once traveling to EU. It gave so much of positive social and economic and cultural experience to people, and Ukrainians probably started to feel that they are treated equally. So the same should be repeated in many, many areas. We can't be a professor from the EU side and look at Ukrainian students as a student representing as a nation and to act in this way. I'm looking forward very much, to more openness, more transparency from EU side, and indeed more recipient way from the Ukrainian side, being ready, to do some reforms because they are inevitable. Is there no point of return reached in Ukraine? I think in the hands of many, many million people in Ukraine, yes. Should I say about all politicians in Ukraine? I wish, but I can't for the time of being. I wish Ukrainian politicians listened more attentively to Ukrainian people and understand their wish for modernized Ukrainian, European Ukraine as soon as possible. Thank you, Eugene.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? If not, I have one question from another very good friend of our NGO and the former deputy director of the Ukrainian World Congress mission in Brussels, who says to whoever wishes to take the question, what are the prospects of the EU signing the Common Aviation Area Agreement with Ukraine this year? And where does the conversation stand on common roaming calling charges for Ukrainians in the EU and for EU citizens in Ukraine?
I have to admit, although I am a substitute member of the Transport Committee, I did not follow the latest state of affairs where we stand. I would wish, of course, that we can conclude it. We would like to have with as many countries as possible such an agreement. I think we have it with Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. Petros, perhaps you are also more aware of that, dealing with Georgia also. But I hope that we can achieve a conclusion thereof. And the second question was on
roaming charges.
Roaming charges. That is part of what we in the European Parliament have argued in our reports to, first of all, to have it done amongst the countries, to abolish it. Also, we said it also for the Western Balkans. I would wish that with the countries of the Eastern Partnership, we could abolish that. Well, it's a simple, it's a political will, and we have to convince our telecom companies that they have something for that in return.
Anybody else?
Can I briefly?
Yes.
I can speak. It is easier for me on a roaming issue. I think that there are many of us within European Parliament who already engaged in, let me call this lobbying, not looking for another word, for countries like Georgia and Ukraine, also Moldova, although it is slightly more difficult to be allowed to use this facility. There are, of course, technical problems. I would like to go into details, but I'm positive, and I know that consequent stance of MEPs within the European Parliament friendly towards Eastern Partnership is to give positive results. I think that aviation agreement may be slightly more difficult, taking into account let's say, experience of recent years in terms of security, but I also hope that we can solve this and positively for Ukraine. I still remember in previous legislature with the official SEDE mission to Eastern Ukraine, us visiting Mariupol and talking to local city council members about difficulties for this part of Ukraine with transportation constraints. And so we have to look into this issue as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Petros. I think you wanted to say something?
Yes, very shortly. I would be very much in favor to speed up preparation for aviation agreement. For the time of being, the European Parliament just had a decision about EU and Israel, which was conditioned for by some politicians with the additional principles of, let's say, democratic or whatever issues related. I hope this agreement will not delay to come on our agenda. We will do, by the way, it's a good reminding point. I mean, we will push forward once back in September to the European Parliament necessarily. On roaming, it is a complicated issue, by the way, a bit more than it looks like. Now, 40 times more we pay once we are in Ukraine calling home. It's unacceptable. I think semi-monopolies of telecom companies make too much out of this, not letting people to benefit. But as far as I know, there are some technical as well legal conditions which have to be fulfilled. But definitely, after visa liberalization, I think roaming would be something what would be taken by people as openness of the European Union, a good example of the European Union applied in case of Ukraine. It must be done.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, Miron, do we have any final question, or do I just ask at this point the panelists for their closing remarks?
I think we have our limits in accordance with our invitation, and I think we should give the time to our panelists to make their conclusions about their presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Naida, for keeping us fairly disciplined, although it's vacation time, so we can allow ourselves to be a bit, doing a bit of overtime. I said that we had 4 outstanding panelists. As you have seen, they're fascinating, and that's why we don't really want to let them go. But we must. So I'm going to ask each panelist for a 1-minute closing remark, and we shall be then closing this webinar. Mrs. Fotyga.
I really appreciate this initiative and ability to speak. It is important because of the broken ceasefire on the agreement to support Ukraine on its efforts to fulfill the provisions of Minsk agreement, but we are not here to lecture Ukraine. We have our own experience of difficult path to transatlantic, to Euro-Atlantic integration, yet we show, both Lithuanians here and myself, a Pole, that it is to be achieved, that you have to be patient, and that this path is worth to be taken. And we are here to support you, to stand by you, to show our solidarity, and to give advice if needed, if requested.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Fotyga. The next one, Mr. Andrius Kubilius.
Well, again, thanks a lot, Mr. Chole. And really, I would say, you know, that it would be very, very important if Ukraine really would have some kind of Ukraine 2050 strategy, and your NGO and your think tank leadership, it can be done. We can be, you know, present in preparation or in assistance to prepare such a strategy, which would have perhaps clear targets. What needs to be achieved in 2030, what needs to be achieved in 2040, having in mind also different factors, like what kind of reforms are needed to be done in Ukraine, what to do with Russian factor which is influential still in Europe, you know, we're sometimes hesitant to move forward, you know, in that direction. Exactly depends on Russia. And also on our side, we need to have much more clear strategy, which I would call EU strategy towards Ukraine, you know, 2050 also, with very clear goals, 2030, 2040, 2050. And that is where we can combine our forces, you know, and then, you know, to have a joint activities, not only on European continent, but I again would remind what an important role is for United States of America, where Canada, being, you know, part close neighbor, can play a very important role. So thanks a lot, and good luck for all of us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kubilius. Michael Galler.
Yes, thank you once again for this possibility. And I think we are on the same side when it comes to the necessity to join forces. Join forces, that means for me, those who have a responsibility on the EU side, those who are in charge in Ukraine, but especially our agenda is the one that fulfills, that helps to fulfill the aspirations of the people of Ukraine. And in this regard, I have no doubt where they are looking to, where they are heading for. And together with the real reformers in the country and with all those who are engaged on the European side, I think we can be very precise when we go on in the details. And we should not, well, 2050 is nice to hear, but I would like to be around when it comes to the ambitious agenda. So I think we should definitely be ambitious enough to pursue an agenda that gets Ukraine closer to us earlier than 2050 and earlier than 2040, in order that people don't lose hope, because that is the most awful thing, if the people lose the hope that democracy and Europe and prosperity can have an impact for them personally. If they think it's only for some oligarchs, they will lose hope and be open to those who have a bad agenda behind their faces. So let us continue, and I think we will be successful if all forces are joined.
Thank you very much, Michael. And Petros Auštrevičius.
Thank you, Eugen, for bringing us together to speak about Ukraine's future, as well as our dedication to this future. It's good when people speak about future, not about past. Although we should know past and draw right conclusions and not to repeat mistakes from the past, but about future. I believe more we see dedication from political circles in Ukraine to go on difficult, complicated reforms progress, not thinking about 4 years, time period when a government is in office or politicians are in Verkhovna Rada, but about national vision, national interests, unless we see any attempts to use judiciary for political purposes, as for example, ongoing process against President Poroshenko, or any pressures against media, like Перший канал, I think we will see more European perspective in Ukraine. It depends on us a lot of giving this commitment and opening gates, but it depends on Ukraine as well, how much mobilization and full implementation, as rightly my colleagues mentioned, not once, will be achieved day by day work, because future is somehow created starting from today and even yesterday. So I wish, 3 decades to come will be full of good achievements. It might be called according to your family name, this strategy, Eugene, but you should know that we're not going away from our commitment to support Ukraine, because it's in our interest as well to see one more normal European country joining us, the union of free, democratic, and indeed based on human rights values union. So good luck and slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you so much to all our panelists. I think somebody said at the outset that there is no holidays when dealing with Ukraine, and that even during holidays we continue to address this issue. I think Ukraine is clearly an incredible country that is doing incredible reforms in a state where the eastern side of Ukraine is under constant Russian aggression and has a part of the Ukrainian territory, namely Crimea, under illegal occupation by the Russian Federation. I think that clearly when one talks about the 4 panelists, I have to say that it was superbly easy to convince them. I think it took 1 call, and in 5 seconds we agreed to hold this webinar. So I thank you for your support. And I thank you for the time you took in order to participate. Mr. Kubilius, you gave quite a few very good advice to our NGO. Rest assured that we will not let the regular suspects have an easy time or any holidays. We will fill any empty space you have in your agenda with issues. And Michael, I just wanted to assure you of one good thing about our NGO. And I extend, and I will be turning to all of you to join our NGO. And Michael, the reason that I'm saying that it's great for you to consider joining our NGO is that you were saying that you hope to be alive in 2050. In joining our board, you will clearly buy yourself 30 years, and you will be there in 2050 with us to assess the work that we have done over the last 30 years. So thank you to all of you. I think that there's a common saying that a friend in need is a friend indeed. You have demonstrated very clearly, not just by words, but by your action in the past. And we continue to count in the future to help Ukraine's European integration. I thank all our participants. Also, we had participants in large numbers from various countries in Europe, in North America, in South America, and I thank everybody for their participation. This webinar is recorded and will be put on our Facebook and on our website. I wish everybody very nice holidays, and thank you once again to all our panelists for your superb presentations and your discussion during our questions and answers. Thank you very much, and à la prochaine.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye then.
Yeah.